Hi everybody, welcome to MRI Ascend, and welcome to our session today where we're really focusing on reinventing the workplace. And this track of sessions that we have here at MRI Ascend are dedicated to looking at the ways that the workplace has changed and shifted, and the ways that in the future we're going to be looking to technology, looking to solutions, looking to the different ways that we interact and connect with people to shape the way that we operate our businesses moving forward. I'm very happy that you're able to join us today, but the reason that we're able to even present these sessions is because of our sponsors. So a quick thank you to all of the sponsors that you see there on the page. Without them, these sessions aren't possible. This conference is not possible. So a massive thank you to all that every one of these partners does to ensure that these conferences are meaningful, the content is hopefully rich, and that we're able to come together and to have these discussions and these conversations. So appreciate all of you very much. By way of introduction, my name is Nicholas Frank. I have been with MRI Software for over 8 years, and I have a dedicated focus in this occupier business, in our workplace solutions. Very happy for you to be here today. I'm also very happy to be joined by Andy Birch, which I will let him introduce himself. Andy?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, my name's Andy Birch. I'm the VP of Product Marketing at MRI. As part of that role, then, my role is to kind of assess some of the market trends, what's going on generally in the real estate industry, and think about how our products really support the challenges faced by you, our clients, and how we can best provide solutions to you to meet your needs. I would say that, like Ascend, generally speaking, is one of those fantastic opportunities for me to actually meet you and talk to you about those challenges that you're facing and get great feedback from you. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that this year, so I'm looking forward to next year when we can meet again in person.
100%, Andy, and I think one of the biggest reasons that we like to have those conferences in person is that ability to connect. And I think connection, speaking in terms of people, in terms of technology, I think that's going to be one of the big things that we harp on today. And that's because at MRI Software, we believe in the power of a well-connected community. And that you may have already heard in various other sessions, but it applies to all areas of our business, and none more so than here in the workplace, workspace avenue of our solution set. And we want to talk about today some of those connections that we have between landlords and their tenants, between the owner-operators and the occupiers. And Andy, what does it mean from our perspective to be well-connected?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, it's a good question. So generally speaking, what we've seen for a number of years is that many advancements have been made in how each respective role, whether you're an owner or whether you're an occupier, in terms of taking advantage of solutions that help you kind of automate what you need to manage your particular business. What we see now, though, is really the fact that the next kind of step change for that both owner and occupier of that commercial building is how they really interact with each other to meet the needs, their respective needs to manage that building more effectively in terms of, from an occupier perspective, in terms of how it supports their specific needs in terms of their employees. So I really think that we're going to see that kind of change. To some extent, it always gets led by the consumer market. You see that advancement in the consumer market. We're going to see that advancement, I think, in the business market as well, in terms of that collaboration, that communication, that connectivity between both parties to make their processes more efficient and effective in terms of their operations.
And you say specific needs, and I think that's really important, because some of those needs maybe internalized, maybe specific business functions, but really a lot of what we've seen in the market and the changes that we've seen in the market have been kind of predicated by that elephant in the room, which obviously affects the workplace, affects the way that we start to reimagine how people work together in certain spaces and offices. And I think over a year now, we've been looking at things at space optimization and planning to meet those changing market demands, Andy. And I think we can kind of hopefully start to cater some of the ways that we attack those problems based on some of these specific changing market demands.
That's right. I'd like to kind of just rephrase it a little bit, because what we've really seen is not that the change in need has taken place. I think it's just an acceleration that the pandemic has provided a catalyst for that change and really kind of driving people to reevaluate their space. When we actually think of space, particularly from an occupier perspective, above and beyond your cost for manufacturing or operations within your particular business, your real estate, generally speaking, is the second biggest expense that you have. So it's really strange that for many organizations, they don't pay closer attention to their optimization of that space. And I think that change that's been brought on by the pandemic really will drive them to reevaluate that and how they look at that space optimization, and indeed the changing work environment. So we're moving really from many organizations having all of their employees come into the office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. That's going to change to more of a hybrid working environment as they reevaluate which employees need to be on site and which don't. I think in conjunction with that, in terms of the market demands, we've seen for a number of years this kind of bubbling in terms of people's requirements as they look at what's going on, and indeed not just from a specific employee and how they fit within that space, but generally speaking in terms of other areas, in terms of sustainability, in terms of the environmental impact, and indeed the running costs from a business perspective of that particular place that they're leasing. And I think that these changing market demands would just be accelerated by the pandemic, and we'll see greater change in this particular area. The second point that I'd like to make on this is really there's going to be a change in the relationship between owner and occupier. Really, we're looking to see a change from a lease-centric approach, where there's very much a handshake at distance in terms of a lease agreement and a passing of this huge paper contract through the various parties involved, lawyers, brokers, etc. We're going to see more of a flexible, dynamic requirement in terms of that relationship between owners and occupiers. Much like other trends that we've seen over the last few years, things like Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, where it's really driven by the fact that fundamentally that consumer, that client, is looking for a better client experience, which they haven't been receiving. So, stories of taxis not picking people up in New York, etc., in terms of hotels not being available or suddenly charging a premium because they're down to the last few spaces in that hotel. That's going to change in real estate as well, in terms of how the future of things like hoteling, in terms of utilizing that space on a part-time basis, is going to impact that market. Then finally, we have the risk and compliance area in terms of ensuring both the regulatory approval that we've seen over the last few years with things like IFRS 16, ASC 842 and so on, but also in terms of that physical compliance. So, maybe we're seeing a third wave, a fourth wave, whatever, so we have to adjust the number of employees that can come into the building. So we'll have to constantly reevaluate that. What I really would kind of urge people to think about is the fact that space optimization is certainly not going to be a one and done. I need to reduce the limit so that I can let people in and that's it. That's all I need to think about. It's going to be a new wave of evaluating that optimization of the space.
And Andy, I think that brings us to our next point, which is really, what are those challenges that are being faced by the occupiers that are looking at their spaces, that they're coming back to the office? They may already be back in the office, but I think it's an interesting point that you raise, because I think that first piece is looking at how you need to reconfigure that space to make sure that it meets local demands or even compliance standards that you mentioned earlier, dependent on region, dependent on country. Things can shift and change, and if you're a business that has locations all around the globe, much like MRI Software, you have to be able to take those different things into account. But then as those guidelines change, as things shift, as your employees become more comfortable, what are some of those additional things that you need to be looking at and considering, right?
Yeah, to some extent, that HR representative, facilities management person has fulfilled, from a physical space perspective, a very kind of reactive role. It's like, okay, we've got like a contractor that services the whole place, cleans it every day. I just need to manage the contract with that. It's up for renewal. Oh, I need to think about, maybe someone that services the perimeter of the building, the garden, security, that kind of thing. It's all kind of, it's all been fairly mundane up until this point in terms of looking at that, managing in that. Now, those people have been elevated to a position of strategic importance within the organization in terms of really how the organization moves forward. So this is a huge responsibility on your shoulders if you're in that role in terms of making sure that you meet both that kind of compliance requirement and managing the safety of your employees, but also balancing that in terms of the productivity of the company. So having the ability to have that information on hand in front of you so you can be more agile, more flexible in terms of how you look at who you can bring in, where, how, why, etc., is going to be really important.
And that's speaking at the floor plan level, Andy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's speaking at reconfiguring the office. But I think one of those other things that people are talking about, and you mentioned it previously, the whole hot desking, hoteling idea, and being able to manage the spaces from a scheduling standpoint becomes as important as just retrofitting the office layout as well.
Yeah, we need to think beyond the one space, one occupier perspective, because you and I are probably thinking along those lines because of MRI and the buildings that we're in. But we also need to think of the urban location where maybe there's multiple tenants in the building. They're looking at things like meeting spaces in terms of common areas, etc. It's how do I provide a better mechanism, a more effective mechanism to ensure that I book that out, that everyone remains safe, that someone comes in afterwards, tidies up, cleans the space, sanitizes, etc. That's really important for now. But longer term, people are going to evaluate the fact that, I had all of this kind of empty space in the building that I was reserving for meetings that I could really cut down that space, or I've got a bunch of salespeople that are out on the road most of the time. They each have their dedicated desk, but they don't really need a dedicated desk. They could be hot desking. So it's that concept of making the whole space more effective to actually not only meet the current safety requirements, but also in terms of having that significant impact on the business costs moving forwards.
And I think one thing that we have yet to think about in many instances is, now that we're bringing people back in, how do we actually capture all of the data of these movements, measure against all of that data certain metrics that we want to be able to utilize to make better business decisions moving forward? Because I think you made a really good point earlier that everything we're doing is very much in the here and now to get people back, but that this is a constant moving target in terms of making sure that the feasibility of your office is as high as possible, the productivity of your workforce increases as well. That's a whole new set of data points and a whole new set of metrics that I don't think a lot of people have really considered before. And one of the reasons that some of those job roles have become elevated, because now this has become not only a significant metric, but maybe in the longer term a significant cost associated with it as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. I think people probably recognize that if you go to a shopping center, retail mall, you'll know that the owner of that mall, that shopping center, generally tracks not just the revenue associated with the individual shops themselves, but also kind of demographics around people coming into that, measuring foot traffic. Because what they want to do is really analyze relative financial elements together with those demographics to get that better picture of where, which part of the mall is kind of most effective, where traffic comes in, how to kind of really maximize the revenue associated with that place. We're going to see more of that within the office environment, and we're going to see more situations where it makes a lot of sense to have information about employees, how many are coming in each day, track that kind of information, not because you're checking up on that employee or anything like that, but really in terms of understanding what you need to provide to support that community. Really in terms of providing your employees the best experience, so not having them crammed in, making sure they're happy, providing motivational aspects to really drive the productivity of your organization. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that, and how you can really differentiate the performance of your organization with that data that's available.
Yeah, and that data, it's just another entry point for this general landscape of the workplace and how we measure against that. And something that we saw from IDC recently was them mentioning MRI software and how we're able to work with other providers to create this landscape of solutions, how that's becoming the future of this area, being able to take different types of needs and bringing that together to create a comprehensive view and a comprehensive picture of what your business is doing and how it's operating. And one thing I think we're going to get into a little bit later is, we keep talking about property, we keep talking about the space, but then also thinking about the people and being able to bring all those different measurements in to make sure that you're operating effectively. And MRI software, again, we're not immune to what's been happening with these workplaces, and we have several locations all across the globe, and we've had to handle things very dependent on the different regions. But we weren't just looking at ourselves, we're also kind of looking at the market and ways that MRI software can help cater to this specific area of need for our clients and for those within the industry. And as many of you know, and many of you watching now may be a part of, several of the acquisitions that we've made in this space to help drive our innovation, to help hopefully move your business forward, to help redefine what success looks like in the corporate real estate world. Over the last few years, we've acquired some businesses. Cube and their Horizon corporate real estate product was the first foray of MRI into this new landscape. We also had the acquisition of ProLease, bringing new lease admin, lease accounting, and space planning tools to the market and to the MRI clients that we serve. And then on that same, I believe, week, Andy, we also made the acquisition of Leverton, which, very busy week here at MRI, brought contract intelligence, the ability to provide lease abstraction tools for corporate occupiers into our market space. And that's become very apparent as a necessity as people start to reevaluate their lease terms and negotiations, being able to see what their contracts say, and especially on the occupier side where you have different landlords across the business, your lease terms are very different contract to contract, and being able to bring all that stuff into a system like ProLease, into a system like Horizon, creating that value for our clients. But we also recognized that not all of you focus primarily in real estate. A lot of you don't focus primarily in real estate, and you may have a need to provide an outsourcing of those services to make sure that what it is that you're doing and how you're operating is as effective as possible. So we also acquired McManus, based out of Chicago, to provide a managed services offering that allows you not only the ability to have our team of individuals, of experts, looking at your contracts, auditing those for possible cost savings, but then providing the actual real estate function of your business for you. Because MRI, we deal in real estate. Real estate has been our bread and butter. Those were our solutions that we had kind of pre some of the new shifts of this returning to office. The pandemic came, certain things had to be looked at, and Andy, I think we made some big strides over the last few months in providing some new solutions for the MRI client base.
Yeah, absolutely. Over the last few months, we've made a number of strategic acquisitions. Firstly, in that same kind of lease administration facilities management space, we acquired AMT Direct. AMT providing that kind of real estate and equipment lease capabilities, both from an occupier and owner lease administration perspective. And then Net Facilities really providing a great kind of web-based solution for facilities management, primarily in the United States. And then we acquired Who's on Location. Who's on Location provides a people presence management solution. What does that actually mean? Well, historically, probably the only thing that you did in this space may be in terms of having a visitor management system to produce like a guest badge or whatever when people came in. Who's on Location is much more than that. It's really providing solutions for employee, contractor, and visitor management to really manage the access of those individuals into different buildings, into different parts of the building, and really supporting how we now kind of automate some of those processes to the extent that it also provides evacuation management capabilities. So if there's a fire, it can automatically notify all of the people that have come into that building based on that kind of automation of entry process about the fact that there's a fire and they need to evacuate, and then use that to actually check off that everyone has actually left the building. So that's really interesting, particularly, we'll go into a little bit more detail about this later, about the changing dynamics of the workplace. Then Manhattan. So many of you have probably heard of Manhattan. Manhattan provide essentially an integrated workplace management solution for that corporate real estate client, for the occupier, providing everything from the financial management through to the capabilities to handle things like space planning, space optimization, as well as the desk and room booking capabilities.
And hopefully some of those different solutions pique some of your interest. We have a lot of sessions here at Ascend, but then obviously a lot of materials outside of this conference available to talk more to these solutions. Hopefully some of the different things Andy just mentioned, especially with some of our newer acquisitions, start to resonate with some of the problems that you may be facing and some of the different ways that you're looking at your workplace. And I think all of these different acquisitions, all of the technology that MRI Software is bringing together puts us in a really unique position, because we've always had a very strong presence in the owner and the operator side of the real estate game. But now by having these new solutions in the occupier space, by having this new data, all of this technology that we're bringing together, we now have a 360-degree view of the workplace. We're able to see it from both sides, and hopefully, again, getting back to our first point at the very beginning about connecting people, connecting tenants and landlords, owner-operators with occupiers. These solutions all start to come together to provide one centralized view, at the end of the day, ultimately, of that one lease document that both sides of the house are working from. And Andy, I think it's a really interesting place for MRI Software to operate, and gives us really a unique position to see how that market could be best defined moving forward.
Yes, exactly. As we were talking earlier about the fact that we handle both the owner and occupier side, it's really, I think, some of the value that we can add to our clients is really the fact that we've got a long history of understanding their respective requirements, the kind of information that they pass off to the other respective parties, so whether it's from the owner to the occupier or vice versa. So it's really from the very kind of simplistic view of things like electronic signature handling and how you send a digital document from one to the other, what the typical kind of process flow for that is, what that looks like in terms of who needs to approve it, and how that gets routed from one place to the other. To the more kind of future-looking area of how those different parties are going to look to collaborate and communicate with each other more holistically in order to drive a mutually beneficial relationship between those parties. So I think we're going to see a lot of that, and that kind of touches on what we're going to cover later.
Thank you, Andy. And we're really excited to be presenting a lot of really good sessions in this workplace arena. One that I hope you were already able to catch. If not, you'll be able to see on demand. Was our session that we did with Cornet Global, talking about workplace agility and the return to work, where we got responses from both occupiers as well as owner-operators about what their plans are in returning to work, whether it be for their tenants or for the tenants, whether it be for their employees. And we start to see some really interesting dynamics and changes in the way that both sides view the return to office. So hopefully you caught that session. If not, again, we'll be able to see that on demand. Also, we have some upcoming sessions talking about many of the things that we've discussed here today. So sessions on contract intelligence and that Leverton artificial intelligence platform to help elevate your leases and the way that you go to business based on that powerful lease abstraction, so that you can review and action on your lease contracts. We also have a session on who's on location and the new presence management tools that Andy spoke about earlier today, as well as some of the stuff on space scheduling, space planning, and the way that you want to look at your buildings and the way that you can continue to optimize the way that you're utilizing your space. So we have a lot of really good sessions for you, and hope that throughout the day you're able to attend some of those. You know, in APAC, we have some of our offices that have already come back and are starting to function. We need to start looking at the future, Andy. And so what are some of the things that you're seeing beyond some of the things that we've already spoken about that we need to consider?
I've got a few items on this list. We'll start at the top with some of the things you already are aware of. You might be going, oh, I've heard this before, Andy, about kind of smart buildings, smart tech. But it's really in terms of the differentiation around that kind of moving forwards. Obviously, we're all aware of some of the things that many people already have in the office, like the voice controls, asking Alexa, Google, Siri, etc. to turn on the lights. Or the fact that when you just have those sensors in the corridor, it senses when you're there and can turn them on, turn them off. These are all great steps in the right direction from a sustainability perspective in terms of energy use and consumption. But what we're going to actually see, I think, is greater flexibility and control in those areas, and how that ties to some of the technology that's available to you. Indeed, as we heard from Saurabh earlier today in the keynote presentation, he doesn't even have a key to his apartment anymore. And some of those trends that we're seeing in things like hotels, in kind of residential properties, etc., are going to extend to the office. So what you're actually going to have is the ability to open the office door with your phone, or with some kind of code on your phone, or scanning some kind of QR code or something along those lines. You're thinking, yeah, but I've got a card that I can just swipe to get into the building. That's fine, but the thing that we see is that through this new technology, we're going to drive greater flexibility in terms of how you use that space. We touched on earlier about how we're seeing trends towards hoteling, hybrid kind of work environments. We can see more of that. So wouldn't it be great if I can control access to a meeting room through just sending someone something on their phone, or indeed for them to actually using a mobile app to actually book a specific room for a specific period of time and only being able to get into that space during the allotted time that they've booked. This is beneficial in terms of how you increase the effectiveness of areas, particularly those common areas, those meeting rooms, common spaces, but also in terms of the safety and security around the employees. So we're going to see more of that coming through in the future. We've talked before about things like biometric access, IoT, etc. I think you'll see more of that coming through. Let's not go too much along the lines of Terminator or something else around those specific areas, but for sure that's coming. One thing that I think will be here sooner rather than later is the concept of geofencing. So actually detecting when someone is in a particular area. Now, this is not like a Big Brother concept. This is more from simply a safety and security. So think about this. If you're a smaller company, you may have concerns about things like a single employee going to a site for maintenance, for maybe servicing that building. So that kind of lone worker management has had kind of issues over the last few years. So this provides a way to automate detecting whether an employee is in a particular building or not, and ensuring the safety of that person. If you think about maybe the other extreme, so some of the multinationals maybe that are listening in, is maybe you've got some kind of manufacturing unit. There's kind of high risk associated with that, with maybe chemicals, other materials, processes. So you want to ensure the safety of people going into particular areas, ensure particular doors are shut, etc. Geofencing would allow you to detect whether those employees had left a place and automatically potentially lock those facilities as required. All of that also ties into the business element, the financial cost of running that, and ensuring that energy components are optimized. So things like having a HVAC unit just ticking over for most of the time, someone coming in because they booked a particular space. It's not because they detect that person there, but it's actually because they booked that, and it kicks off the fact that it goes up to a normal speed in time for that person's visit. Because I live in Canada. You tell me that it's only going to detect to switch on the furnace when I come into the space and it's like -10. I don't want that. I want it to be kind of maybe up to temperature by the time that I actually walk into the building. So those kind of controls are going to come into play. From a prop tech perspective, so we're really going to see how we're going to leverage things like artificial intelligence and automate some of that mundane to make the organization more efficient in terms of how they manage all of the financial requirements associated with those particular buildings. So think back to Nick talking about this earlier about contract intelligence and the ability to abstract all of the relevant information from those lease agreements and store that appropriately so that's all on hand so that you understand all of the terms associated with that building and the implications from owner to occupier and vice versa. What we will also see is how that data provides us the capability to really look at that information. I talked a little bit before about shopping centres and demographics and so on. This is really taking that to the next level in terms of bringing that information in and really truly analysing the effectiveness of those different buildings that you might occupy and comparing information about running costs, about building lease costs, together with the occupancy of that building. One thing that we're starting to see certainly coming forwards is the fact that we're talking about workspace management today, but what we really see moving forwards is how, because of the focus on the client, on the employee, how that information is strategic in terms of supporting that business model, whether it's a hybrid model, whether you're looking at hoteling, etc. We're going to see the intersection between workspace management and workforce management to understand the requirements that you need to actually support your employees today, but also how you can look at the future and put in place the right facilities to support that growing employee staff count that you might have. And then we talked about the 360-degree view. So we're going to have that changing dynamics of the relationship. We're certainly going to have, I think, collaborative workspaces and hoteling to a greater degree moving forwards. I think the technology is here to support that, and people can take advantage of that. What we see maybe as well is the fact that as people start to evaluate their office needs, they may well reduce the space in that office property. So you'll have buildings where there's that larger tenant may reduce the space that they need. The onus then is on the owner, operator of that building to really start assessing, well, how do I fill that space? What do I need to do? So you're going to see a larger number of tenants maybe occupying a smaller space in the building. What that actually means is there's potentially a reverse in some of the recent trends. So recently, we've seen situations, particularly with offices in high-value urban environments, where they lost that retail space on the ground floor because they could sell that space for more money for increased office space. We may see a reverse in that where those amenities return because there's a larger number of tenants occupying a smaller space where they don't want to take up a big part of their office with a kitchen or whatever, that they're going to need to have that common area with those amenities to better serve the needs of the employees in that building. So we're going to see how that manifests itself over the next couple of years. I think, finally on that, what we're looking really for is that differentiated guest experience. So we talked earlier about the change from a lease-centric perspective to a client-centric perspective. It's about really how we all want to be treated, about how we all want that increased level of support. We want the information immediately on hand on our mobile devices about what's going on, so we want better communication. We want to be able to collaborate and say, I want this particular space at this particular time, and almost get like an immediate response. Those changing kind of dynamics of how we all function are going to have a material impact on how the occupier is served by the owner in these workspaces.
All of that goes back to the beginning of our workplace track here, Andy. We believe in the power of a well-connected community, right? Bringing these people together right there with all of the focus that we've always had on the property, on the real estate. Now actually bringing those people in there, creating those connections, and creating that connection not only with the people, but then with all of the technology that we've discussed today. So thank you, Andy, for your time. I appreciate everything that you do for us here at MRI Software, and certainly for everything that you provided for us today as well. And clients, I hope that you also found this insightful and are finding MRI Ascend insightful as well. As we begin to reinvent the workplace, or continuously reinvent the workplace, we're also reinventing our future. And MRI Software, we want to be there with you so that we can reinvent our futures together, because we're all in this together. And I appreciate all of your time today and look forward to meeting with you all again, hopefully physically, here in the not too distant future. So Andy, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks everyone for listening through this. I hope you found that insightful and useful.
And everybody take care.